Welcome to the Great Basin Smoke Dispersion Briefing for March 2nd. This is Gina McGuire. Over the last week, we've had some light amounts of precipitation, mainly across the central Idaho mountains into western Wyoming. However, this precipitation is still well below normal from what we would see this time of year. Further south, much of the Great Basin remained dry. The water vapor satellite image from this morning shows an area of high pressure off the Baja Peninsula with a ridge of high pressure extending north into the western U.S. There is a weak system that's now moving eastward across western Montana and across the northern Rockies, and this will provide some breezy winds today in the north and eastern side of the Great Basin, along with some light shower activity over parts of southeast Idaho into Wyoming and possibly far northeast Utah. If we look at the ventilation index for today, with that ridge of high pressure over much of the western side of the Great Basin, ventilation indices will remain low with poor dispersion. However, further north over Idaho, the eastern half of Utah and Wyoming, where winds are a little stronger, and we have some precipitation this morning, dispersion will remain slightly higher. Looking at the individual components of the ventilation index, the transport winds on the left show these breezier winds over southeast Idaho, Wyoming, and into parts of northeast and eastern Utah, along with higher mixing heights. Further west under that ridge, winds are lighter and also mixing heights are much lower. Looking at Thursday, this ridge of high pressure moves eastward into the eastern side of the Great Basin, with some clouds and possibly some showers moving into parts of far western Idaho and northwest Nevada. The ventilation indices will also decrease as you move further north and east as that ridge moves across Idaho and Utah. We may see a little bit of slight improvement over the western side of Nevada. If we look at the individual components, again, you see generally the winds are light across the Great Basin. They might start picking up over far western Nevada and the Sierra, along with mixing heights relatively low with the exception of the far north and west. Moving on into Friday, this ridge now moves further east and we have a storm system starting to approach off the west coast, so winds will be increasing over the western side and northern side of Nevada. And again, you can see how the dispersion improves significantly over northern and western Nevada, but still remains very low over the central and eastern side of the Great Basin under that ridge of high pressure. Looking at the transport winds, again under that ridge, very light winds, but we do see the winds increasing over northern and western Nevada and into the western side of Idaho. Also, mixing heights will be improving on the western and northern side of the basin and remain relatively low under the ridge over the rest of Nevada and into Utah. Looking at the Utah Clearing Index, generally in the mountains of central Utah and the Uinta Mountains, the forecast clearing index will remain high. However, over the western and northern portions of Utah, you can see how the clearing index decreases as those winds start to lighten up later in the week. Over the next several days through early Saturday morning, any precipitation we see across the Great Basin will be relatively light. We may see some slightly heavier amounts in the central Idaho mountains, especially later this week, and then we will start to see that precipitation increasing in the Sierra, especially as we approach Friday and Saturday. As we move through this weekend and into early next week, the pattern will remain very active across the west, and we'll see significant amounts of precipitation across many areas of the Great Basin. This first storm really starts to amplify and move through on Saturday, and you can see the dispersion is very good across much of the Great Basin, with the exception of parts of southeast Idaho into Wyoming. Again, winds will be increasing ahead of this system. On Monday, the low approaches and starts to move into the western side of the Great Basin, again with continued breezy winds and also bringing significant amounts of moisture. Dispersion will remain very good across the Great Basin Sunday and into early next week. As this next low drops down into Southern California, we may see winds lighten up a little bit, especially over the central and eastern side of the Great Basin. So we may see some areas that have slightly lower ventilation indices. However, for the most part, good dispersion across the Great Basin through early next week with those stormy conditions. Looking at the overall precipitation forecast from early Saturday morning through early Monday morning, and you can see this increase in precipitation in all areas of the Great Basin. Certainly the highest amounts are in the mountainous terrain over the Sierra Nevada, where over 4 or 5 inches of total precipitation may occur, and even higher amounts in some locations. Further east across much of the Great Basin, many areas will see over an inch of total precipitation during that time period. Looking at the overall forecast, temperature and precipitation as we go into the second week of March, we'll likely see below normal temperatures across much of the Great Basin, along with above normal precipitation. Again, a very wet March is on tap across much of the area. That concludes our briefing for today. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us. Thank you for listening.